welcome to our webinar this morning. It's very beautiful here in sunny Derbyshire. I hope it's nice where you are. The session that we're talking about today is managing overwhelm in the workplace and managing overwhelm in life. We have the privilege of having Neve with us this morning, who's the founder of A Better Workday. So welcome, Neve, and I'm sure you'll do a little introduction to yourself, and also Dr. Nicola Eccles, who is the head of mental health and wellbeing here at On Wellbeing. So the idea this morning is this is a really a bit of a chat. It's a chat space. So do use the question boxes, do feel free to use the chat space, and do feel free to ask any questions as we go. Neve, why don't you introduce yourself before we kick off?
Absolutely. So I already see some familiar faces in the attendee list, so delighted to have some people that I know join, and hopefully I get to know more of you through the chat function, as you said, later on. I'm the founder of Better Workday and the author of Remote Working Essentials, but practically I'm a recovering workaholic, which means that I would have burned out multiple times in my career as I did my best to progress and achieve and do all of the things that many of us wanted to do at work. So today, and in my day-to-day work now, I challenge people to think differently about how they manage their time, their energy, and their attention, so that we can rediscover the joy of work, do what we love doing, but not burn ourselves out in the process. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know yourselves over the last few months, and well done on the On Wellbeing app. Delighted for you guys.
Thank you. That's marvelous. Nicola.
Yes, so I am Nicola, Head of Mental Health and Wellbeing for On Wellbeing. We have a digital product which we have just launched, very excited about. So like the skill development around mental health. I like to call it the Duolingo of mental health apps. My background is actually sport and health, but it quickly transgressed into health behavior change, and now mental health behavior change. So how can we learn ways to look at the world and cope a little bit better? So I'm so excited to talk with Neve today. We met through some mutual work we're doing, and soon realized we had a lot of shared interests, and I think today is going to be very exciting. So I am going to just start here by saying that what I find in a lot of the work I'm doing, in a lot of the organizations that I'm going to speak with, and also in the research, in the evidence base, is that a lot of people are struggling to manage with a lot of things post-pandemic, post sort of perma-crisis. But one of the main things that crops up is the feeling of overwhelm, that constant feeling that you are not going to get through everything you need to get done every day. And many of us have normalized this now. So it's quite normal for us to wake up on a weekday morning, perhaps a weekend morning too, and think, right, a mental list in my head, I'm not sure how I'm going to get all that done today. And I think stepping back, and perhaps Neve can tell us a bit more about this, and thinking about how ridiculous that is as a way to live every day, but for an infinite amount of time, is something that we need to do something about. No one else is going to do something about this. So a lot of people that I talk to in research across the last 10 years, particularly, people have said to me, well, Nicola, when this happens, that's when I'm going to make a change. So when my daughter goes off to university, I'm going to lose some weight and I'm going to see to my knee that's been, really painful for the last 5 years. Or Nicola, when we move house, that is when I'm going to sort this thing out, sort this problem that I've got with anxiety, with low mood. This is when I'm going to address this issue. So we're waiting for a point for something to start. Either we need to feel we have to have more knowledge, or we feel we have to be in a different place. So we're suspended and we're overwhelmed. And those two things together mean that we're not thriving, and we all deserve to thrive. Neve, is that something that you are also seeing?
Yeah, I see it everywhere, as you said, in companies, but also in my network of friends and connections outside of work as well. As you said, it's this normalized feeling of overwhelm. But when you were talking there, Nicola, it reminded me of something that I did for myself mid last year, because I still struggle with that feeling from time to time. It's not like just because we can talk about this stuff that we have it all figured out in our own lives, right? I mean, it impacts all of us. And the phrase I adopted was, I don't do overwhelm. And the reason I chose that phrase was, I use the analogy of smoking. So it took me years to give up smoking. I used to smoke 20 plus cigarettes a day. I gave them up when I was 26. And so I started very young. But just like that, like exactly what you were saying, it would always be, oh, when this happens, you know, when I have a less stressful day, when, you know, I'm not feeling sad, when I don't have my period, when things are going right, that's the day that things will change and I'll take control over my feelings, or in that case, my cravings. And it never worked, because there's always a reason to go back to the feeling of wanting a cigarette. So I woke up one day and I said, I don't smoke. And then when the cravings or when the feelings came in, I was like, well, if I don't smoke, what else will I do about this? So when we talk about overwhelm, if you wake up and say, I don't do overwhelm, and then all those thoughts come in, you're like, okay, well, if you don't do overwhelm, what are you going to do? And it makes you go, okay, so maybe there's an action I need to take here. And it just interrupts, as you said, this normalization of overwhelm that we've fallen into, and gives us back a little bit of control over our own decisions during the working day and during the day in general.
Yes, so I really like that concept, and it reminds me of a lot of techniques that we use in mental health. I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but it's on that vibe of, if you tell yourself you're not that person, how can you recreate it differently? So what would she do? What would the non-smoking Neve do? What would the not overwhelmed Nicola do? Well, she would do this in this instance. And so one thing, perhaps, as we're listening, the first thing we can take away from here is, okay, one tip would be to imagine yourself as not that person, as someone that's not stressed, as someone that's not overwhelmed, as someone that doesn't get anxiety. I know it's not as easy as that, but let's start with that as a takeaway point. And I think it's useful, like you say, you know, I work in mental health and behavior change. You work in, you know, finding the joy in work and not feeling overwhelmed. But it doesn't mean we don't still get those moments. It doesn't mean that our lives stop being overwhelmed, and that's the point. There's no point waiting, because our lives won't ever stop being overwhelmed. So, you know, to give some personal backdrop to this, and I'm sure Jen and Neve, you can maybe share a similar story here. Perhaps you can share in the chat. Just every day I feel overwhelmed. On what day is it today? Friday. On Tuesday, I had a long business day in Sheffield. I had to rush back. I had a number of pressing things that had to happen in that evening. I have 3 children who I'm responsible for. And I also at the same time saw a text from my mother saying, please, could you take your dad, my dad, to A&E, or E as it's now known. He's having chest pains. And of course, in that moment, you're like, well, that's just, I already was at tipping point, and that's just brought me over the edge. But you have to try and find a way to say, right, well, I'm not overwhelmed by this. What's going to happen? And it's that moving into the next phase of, I'm not going to let myself sit in that feeling, because it's extremely detrimental. And we know that that's where burnout starts to live, when you live in these feelings of powerlessness, I think. And you'll know about that, Neve, with all your knowledge around sort of burnout. And so we have to move into the next phase of, and so what actions can I take right now? And put them into place. But it is easier said than done. Neve, Jen, I don't know if you have a similar recent story of overwhelm, or feeling like you can't manage.
Oh, well, Jen, do you want to start? Because I have 100.
Well, as Nicola was talking, I thought, oh, she's going to ask me, isn't she? Oh, stressful. And I was thinking, actually, most weekends I get to a Friday and I'm like, okay, what is happening this weekend? And I'm ready for a weekend off. Everybody talks about having a weekend off. And I was thinking, you know, I've got cross country for the kids tomorrow morning. I've got a daughter who's got a game in Liverpool first thing Sunday evening. I'm meant to be catching up with friends. I'm meant to be doing this, that, and the other. And this is my time off. This isn't even like, work is almost that space where I go to relax, not to escape from the madness that is existence when you have family and friends who are struggling or having difficult times, and you want to be that support network and you want to be there with them when they're struggling, and life is just busy. Life is busy. I think that's, you know, part of one of the things that I have learned to accept, and that's okay.
I think you make a really good point, Jen, and Neve, I still want to hear your stories of hundreds of them of overwhelm, but you make a very good point I'm going to tap into later about how demands are not always negative and they're not always work-based. So let's move away from this concept of demands being work-based and negative. Demands can be positive, but still make you feel overwhelmed. And work can be positive and home life can be negative and vice versa. It's not a clear-cut situation where all your work is negative and that's where the stress lies. You know, demands on our resources are what cause us to feel overwhelmed. It doesn't mean that they're negative. A birthday is a demand, but it, you know, and it can still cause you to feel overwhelmed. So it's removing that guilt around that. But this is a good thing. I shouldn't feel like that about this. It doesn't matter. It's still a demand on your resources. Neve, tell us about being overwhelmed.
Yeah, so again, 100 stories, and I won't, because we won't get beyond the stories if we do put it, like, even for example, I was delivering a workshop up in Dublin a few weeks ago, and the kids didn't sleep. They sleep more often now. The kids didn't sleep that night. They were cranky in the morning. I had to get them dressed, out the door, drop them off to creche, run to the train station. It meant that, you know, I had no breakfast, grabbed a pack of barbecue hula hoops and a crunchy, you know, jumped on the train, went up, you know, arrived and had to, you know, put on game face. And there's this feeling of, you know, you're going. But I want us to stop for a second, Nicola, because I believe that we're sometimes creators of our own story here. And like, if you just take a look at the word overwhelm, I just want to challenge us a second. Because do you remember once upon a time we'd say we're overwhelmed with joy or overwhelmed with love? Do you remember? Or like, it's so overwhelmingly fantastic. Like, overwhelm used to always be negative. It used to actually be what it means, which is so much that it swooshes over us like a wave, you know? And when we're overwhelmed with joy, we ride that wave. We're overwhelmed with it. It takes us really kind of fully over, but then we jump off the wave and we return back to our normal baseline of emotion, right? Whereas what I find when we're overwhelmed with stress or overwhelmed with tasks or overwhelmed with expectations from other people or all of these ones, that we ride the wave and then we don't get off it. We stay on it. You know what I mean? And we don't move past it. And I think if we're overwhelmed with any feeling for a long period of time, it's going to burn us out. So if I was ecstatically happy, like really at that like pivot of like joy nonstop, it probably caused me to be hyper, and I'm going to crash.
So actually, we have to break the overwhelm. Is that
So that's it? It's breaking it. It's like, it's going to be a wave. It's going to come over you. But like, as I said, do you do it? Or is it like, is that something that you're going to sit in and accept as your baseline? Or are you going to say, that was an overwhelming moment, now what can I do to move on from it? Because living in overwhelm is quite different, I think, to experiencing periods of overwhelm or moments of overwhelm in our working day. And I think we have to take a second
to say we can stop the overwhelm, to say actually it's our job to break the circuit of overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, because again, with the whole thing about skill development, mental health, it's okay. So we're all going to get overwhelmed. We're all going to get stressed, but it's your responsibility. Well, our first point was to say, I'm not that person. But the second point we're saying here is break the circuit of overwhelm. So, and, you know, in the same way that I talk about disrupting sort of trauma thoughts or something like that, how can you disrupt that moment? So what things do you need in your first aid kit to stop the overwhelm? So I talk a lot about having a little first aid kit in your head for stress, anxiety, trauma, and just the same way we would do it with overwhelm. So what are the things I do when I'm feeling overwhelmed? Well, I make a hot drink. It sounds, or I listen to this song, or I go and stroke my pet, or I do something. It could be any magnitude. Is that what you mean, Neve, to break the circuit?
Exactly. And to give yourself a chance to, you know, feel the feeling and then move on from the feeling, but to do something different with it, right? So so you said breaking the circuit. Like, one of the things I do, and I tell everyone, because I think it's my best invention ever, is I go for a shower in the middle of the day.
Oh yeah,
So
or a bath. That might take
yeah,
a bit long. Yeah.
so
Hot water,
you know, in the past, so studies have shown that our pace of work and the amount of work that we do on any given day has multiplied significantly since the 70s and 80s because of automation and all the advances in technology. So what used to take us a whole week to do, we now do probably in a morning's work. And of course,
That's
our expectation,
incredible.
yeah, it's incredible, right? And look, what that means though is that a 24-hour day is no longer really a day. It's more like 3 days, you know, if we lived in the 80s, because by the amount of things that we would have achieved. So going on that vein, if you have an overwhelming morning or a stressful morning, at lunchtime, you can say, well, that's the end of that day. Like that's the end of that segment of time. That's it. And I jump in, have a shower, wash my hair if it's really bad. Otherwise, it's a body shower. Get out, make myself a cup of tea, and then say, I'm going to start again. And you can start again after lunch, and you can start again at 5 p.m. because there's nothing stopping us from doing that, from stopping in the middle of the day and saying, no, I don't like how this day is going. I'm going to change the story for the rest of the day.
So it's empowering ourselves. So the other takeaway is, right, you're in control of this. I know you don't feel like you are, but you are.
You are.
Now, based on what you're saying there, and also with some of the stuff that I'm reading, the way that we work now at home, hybrid working, and our back-to-back meetings makes it difficult to break the circuit. So actually, it's about whether we're line managers listening today or whether we're just individuals having those conversations and saying, look, I know we just want to get the stuff done and have the conversations. We have to have the breaks, because if I can't walk away for 10 minutes and clear my head and I go from one to the next, by 2 o'clock, I'm burnt out and nothing you're saying to me means anything anymore anyway. So what it's about, if we want to think about productivity, we all know about Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week, and I'm not agreeing with that, but we have limited productivity, we have a limited amount of resources. Okay, so think about hybrid working, taking responsibility for breaking the circuit. So that's the second point we've kind of made today, that we can break a circuit of overwhelm, and we must, whether it's having a shower like Neve, going for a walk, or something else that you need to do, listen to some music, and not, that's part of your mental health strategy to be in work. So you shouldn't be feeling guilty. You shouldn't be made to feel guilty for that. Now, something I want to touch on when I talk about the word guilt and shame is the work that's being done around distractions. So never before in the history of mankind have we had as many distractions on our devices that are consuming us all every day. There's no point in pretending we're all brilliant with it, because we're not. I don't know anyone that is. We're all terrible with it. Now, I'm hoping that in about 10 or 15 years, my children's generation will have a backlash and we'll do something about it. But for now, we're consumed by notifications. I mean, and I think it's Johan Hari, who has a fantastic book called Stolen Focus, and he's on loads of podcasts. So go and have a look for those. He talks about, we literally have an attention span of something like 45 seconds, and that we're having so many disruptions every week, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, that we are finding it very difficult to focus. And there's a lot of guilt around that, because we feel guilty because we know we're doing that in the working day. And I think there isn't an answer, but accepting that we are all experiencing this. It's okay. Nobody's perfect with their phone in a drawer that they never look at. That's not really how it is. But we must challenge ourselves to learn techniques to try and turn notifications off. It's the only way to stop our guilt and to feel less overwhelmed. Because another book I talk about is Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks, Time and How to Use It Right. And he talks a lot about, how we need to limit these distractions, how we need to do something about it, and how we need to make the pressure of other things build up around us and still focus on a task. Neve, what do you think about this, about the distractions we have?
Well, first of all, our reading list is uncannily similar. I've read both books, and I'll add a third book to that trio, which is Attention Span by Gloria Marx. So she just brings those the two ideas together.
Oh, I'll
It's
write that one down.
when you talk about distractions, because I suppose I might have an unpopular opinion when it comes to distractions. So I feel that when we're distracted, it's either because we're tired and we need a break. So our body is actually telling us you can't pay attention. So go actually have a break. Unfortunately, we normally take that break with our phone, which means we never get the rest, and then we're still distracted, right? So we're kind of creating that loop. But people also get distracted, by, I think, wanting to escape their current situation. And I'll give you a very personal example of that in a minute. And then finally, we're distracted by our own thoughts, which means from a work perspective, we've got so much going on in terms of tasks and work that we have to do, that our mind just can't focus on one thing, that we're thinking, I haven't got that job yet, I haven't started that job yet, I haven't started that job yet. And yes, I know I should turn off my notifications, but I worry that if my manager pings me and I don't reply back straight away, that they're not going to think I'm working. And I'd love to tell you that that's no longer the case now that we've been hybrid working for a number of years. But I talk to people every day and they just feel like they have to still keep all of those things on. Now, the middle one I mentioned there is escapism, and I just don't think we talk about it enough, Nicola. So in work, it could be, we're going for the phone, we're going for the email, we're going for all the things that are going to give us those quick hits because we don't want to focus on the stuff. We say we do, but we don't, because either the task is unclear, it feels too difficult, we don't feel that we're skilled enough, we don't feel that we've got the resources to finish it. And my personal story is basically when I was trying to put my kids to sleep. So look, moms, if mom's watching or listening, I'll say first, sometimes we just want to escape back into adulting when we're being moms of young babies, especially if they don't sleep and stuff. And I found it very, very difficult. So when I'd be trying to rock my kids to sleep, I'd be on my phone. So I'd have them in the arm and they'd be kind of trying to keep the light in their faces, and behind their body I'd have my phone and I'd be scrolling and I'd be checking LinkedIn and I'd be trying to look at my work email, and it would take me ages to put the baby to sleep because I was distracted, right? I wasn't paying attention to their needs, and I was getting stressed out because I was trying to do my social media like while putting my baby to sleep. And so I felt guilty because of the baby, but I also felt guilty because I wasn't getting to my work emails, and I was feeling guilty because I wasn't, living what was on my screen. So it was coming at me from all directions. And eventually I just decided to leave the phone outside the room and just put the baby to sleep.
And deal with the boredom almost, if we're honest.
And deal, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. You took the words out of my mouth. Be bored. Sit in it. I call it the ugly work. I call it the stuff that's not easy. And when you do it, by God, you feel 10 times better when it's done, because you're like, that was where I needed to be. That is what I should have been doing. It doesn't take as long as you think,
And tying it back to overwhelm, then it's about when you're going to be focusing on a task, even though you want to distract yourself. It's so easy to distract yourself. This is increasing the overwhelm, and the task doesn't get done. So do the boring tasks and put away the phone or
just
the
do it.
emails.
Do the ugly. I call it the ugly work. I mean, it's terrible when I tie the kids' story, but like, do the stuff that's difficult for you. You know what I mean? That goes outside your comfort zone, and be okay with FOMO. Be okay with the fact that all the little million snippets of other people's lives would carry on populating inside an Instagram while you're working on something. Like, be okay with the fact that the world will keep turning while you do what's important to you.
I mean, I talk a lot in my work around mental health and low mood and finding purpose, about the way we spend so much time looking at the lives of others and not focusing on us, what we want, what makes us unique. And I know we're digressing a little bit from overwhelm here, but actually it's bringing in the fact that if you're constantly surrounding yourself with everybody else's life, don't you see that although that might be enjoyable, it's a distraction, it's kind of fun, or you didn't know that you could make that in an air fryer, look what you've just found out, but it's all still adding to the knowledge that's going on in your mind. So it's all still adding to the overwhelm. Overall, overwhelm can be good and bad, as I say. You said something to me, Neve, when we talked a couple of months ago, and I thought it was so interesting. I wanted to bring this analogy up again because I really feel this, and it's that you describe yourself in a corridor and you don't know where to turn your attention to next, and that really encapsulated overwhelm for me. Can you talk a little bit about that just now?
Yeah, so when we're chatting about that, I think we're talking about how do we balance it all, right? So, you know, we work, we've got dependents, we've got friends, we've got family, and our own personal activities. And I suppose for a long time, my work being in productivity and performance, I would try to hyper plan everything, right, so that we can fit it all in. And it wouldn't have worked. But what I found was finding moments, as I say, to step into the corridor of our lives and to be able to take a minute for ourselves and say, who needs me right now, or what needs me right now, or what do I need to do for me right now? And in my mind, I suppose for me, all I do is I just close my eyes and just take a minute to go, where should I be? Because it's so easy for us, I think, to spend the whole day on autopilot, or to as I say, hyper plan and hyper schedule, and then get overwhelmed by even our own expectations. But just taking a few minutes to get into the corridor of your life and look at the different doors and say, which one do I choose to go into, is the thing.
Yeah.
And for me, sorry, Nicola, just to kind of keep it going, it's the act of, I suppose, mentally, I am then making the decision to open the door. So the door isn't being opened by the other side and I'm being pulled in. I am deciding to open the door and I am stepping in. And it's just that me making the intentional decision that makes the difference, as opposed to the whole analogy. So it's that idea again, we've said it a few times already. It's us doing what's in our boat. What can we control?
And it's, you know, when you take accountability and responsibility, and actually many of us don't want to, so if we're really honest with ourselves, we want to feel like we're just being pulled, because then we haven't made those decisions, and then it's not our fault and it doesn't really matter. And this goes, you know, a really deep way into a lot of the issues we have with our psychological well-being. But it's when you decide to take accountability and responsibility and be the chooser, it's extremely frightening if you haven't been used to doing that, but it is in the long run a much healthier way to live, to say that's the choice I made, and oh, it was the wrong one, but I've done it and I've taken it. I like that idea of a corridor that we go into to take a moment, and we look around and think, where are we choosing to go to next? Because everywhere needs us, so it's our choice. So I like the concept, and that's the another point I've written down from today, that we are opening it. We're not being pulled in, and it goes back to that, you know, when this happens, I'll do this. It's like, no, you're the creator of this life. And I know we all have different circumstances. I'm not you know, downplaying any difficulties or challenges that we have, but we still have choices. And when you have choices, you have options, and you make choices and you live by those, and you learn as well. You learn from that was the wrong choice. That door was the wrong door to open. But okay, next time I won't open that door at this time of night. So yes, I think that's so interesting. So there's a couple of words that Neve and I talked about that came up, and my word was strategic underachievement, and Neve's word that she said when we were chatting about this was intentional neglect, and they were obviously of a similar ilk. And I think it would be really worthwhile us talking about that for a minute. I want to talk about personal resources in a second too, but first of all, as another point, to talk about what are you going to choose not to do, because in this world of lives that we look at, where everybody is an interior designer, a gardener, a chef, a gym fitness guru, a you know, living their best life out, you know, in the bars, plus doing a great job and bringing up wonderful families, you know, it's not real. And so how do we make those choices around strategic underachievement and intentional neglect? Neve, what, when you come up with that word, what does that mean to you, and how do you play that out in your everyday life?
Yeah, it's interesting, because this for me has been, I think, the game changer in both my business, so in terms of my work life, and in my personal life, because when we try to do everything, we can't do anything well, really, right? And there's no point, as you said, looking at snapshots of lives online. So, you know, in work, I use a phrase quite often, not this year. And the reason I say not this year is because it reminds you that there is next year, right? So it's not ever, it's just not this year. And at home, it's me owning the season I am in my life. And what that means is I'm in the season of having young children. So I can either wish for another season or try to live in another season, or I can just be in my season. And it's so much easier to live in spring when you're behaving like it's spring than to live in spring and try and have it be like winter. You know, like your clothes are wrong,
Yeah,
your hair's
great.
wrong, your food's wrong, the temperature of the house is wrong, everything's wrong. It's the same in our lives. So, for example, I'm in a growing business, I've got young children. So some things that I don't do. I don't do TikTok. I don't do short form content on Instagram anymore for my business. At home, I don't wash the skirting boards as much as I should. I don't do my garden as much as I should. Watch for the poo, because I probably didn't pick it up yesterday. I will pick it up some point this week. I've stopped looking for a flat stomach. I've stopped buying a lot of clothes because I found that pressure was too much. I only buy Emily clothes in pink, purple and white. So all her clothes automatically match. So I don't do a lot of fashion. So there's so much, and interestingly enough, and I could keep going, of all the things I no longer do. And that gives me so much calm. Because I'm literally saying, this is a big, long list of things that I'm just taking off my plate. And it's that, like, do you know that like deep clean? Have you ever done like a deep clean and you just like get rid of loads of stuff? You're like, oh, now I can breathe. Like now I can breathe. And now I can just enjoy the space that I'm in. And just to close on that, it applies to work as much as it applies to our lives, but it's about us bringing ourselves back to our own home, our own world, our own neighborhood, and not trying to get caught up in everything else.
And ever that was a lesson that our mothers told us long ago, wasn't it? You know, so stick to stick to what you know, do what it is that you need to do. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing. But we all do. And the trouble is, as I said before, never before in history have we had access all the time to everybody else's lives. Yeah. We never used to have that when I was growing up. It was like, you know, a magazine once a week to see what the pop stars were doing, not, you know, smash hits. It wasn't constant looking at everything. This is so interesting what we've just said. There's a couple of things, not this year. I love that. But better still, owning the season. If you're in spring, don't pretend that you are in autumn. And I think that's such a visual depiction of how so many of us are living. We're constantly feeling like we should be doing something else. I mean, that's just how we're all feeling. And it's really, you know, it's adding to the overwhelm. It's making us feel discontented. And we know, you know, self-worth, gratitude, these are important things. How can you be grateful if you're always thinking you should be doing something else? But interestingly, it slightly conflicts. So we've saying two slightly conflicting things. I wonder if we can resolve them. We're saying not this year. We're saying own the season. But we're also saying don't wait, you know, don't be like, oh, when this happens, I'll do this. When this happens, I'll do that. So there's a sweet spot. And I think what the sweet spot is, I think what we're saying here is let's choose what matters.
Yeah.
So what matters. And a lot of things can't matter. And that's the cruel fact. Only a few things can matter. So choose them and then act on them. So yes, strategic underachievement, intentional neglect, but similarly, don't sit putting off your life until you've got, you know, lost weight, done this, done that, before you do the things that matter. And this is going to help us, you know, this is a session about overwhelm, to start to feel less overwhelmed because we're taking action, right? So that is going to make us feel better. And we're also choosing to ignore these things. And we're recognizing that the demands, the overwhelm, can be from positive and negative things. It's not just negative things that make us feel overwhelmed. It can also be what we class as positive things. One of the things that I want to just touch on that I do quite a lot of work on is the concept that nobody ever feels stress if they believe they have the resources to cope. So and this comes from a model called the Personal Resource Allocation Model. It was written in 2010, and it's something that I'm trying to push into the workplace stress sphere, because what it says is so important. If you have the resources to cope, ordeal, you won't feel stress. So stress comes when things get added in and you don't believe that you have resources. Now, there's two things going on here. You might have them, but don't believe you have them, in which case it's about encouraging you to have, to build up your resources of belief and self-belief and self-worth, or you really don't have the resources and therefore there's no point giving that thing to you. And in the workplace, I see line managers of thinking about people that they're working with as teams, all who have different resource allocation issues going on. And it's no point in looking at this like a flat lay, all the same, 365 days a year. You're never going to get anywhere. And instead of having an appraisal every 3 to 6 months, you should be having a personal resource allocation discussion, because when people can choose where the resources go, when people can see how things are going to fit in together, they're going to feel empowered, they're going to feel able to deal with life, and the issues around stress and anxiety are going to be less, and overwhelm. And I think the thing maybe you can comment on, Neve, is how we must assess our resources with more scrutiny. That's the word. It's like, don't just assume, let things come at you and react all day long. Sit back and say proactively, how much, when my resources have hit their final point, I'm done. So if they've done by 11 a.m. because a sick child, an issue at work, I'm feeling poorly anyway myself, by 11 a.m. I've probably reached my resources. So what, it's about having those conversations, isn't it? And recognizing that most of us want to do well and give our all at work. We're not all trying to slack off all the time. That's not, that vision isn't true for most of us, I don't think. Neve, about personal resources, then what do you?
I'm so glad you talked about this. So there's an analogy I use for what you're talking about personal resource allocation or job demands, and there's a few other ways that people have talked about it in the past in research, as you said. I particularly like the sizing analogy. So if it's a size 6 problem and you feel like you're a size 6 person, you feel that you can match the problem, or even if you're a size 7 person in terms of the resources available to you, you can tackle a problem. However, if you feel like you're only a size 2, so if you feel like you're smaller than the problem, so you don't have the resources, the support, or the ability to tackle it, it feels so much bigger, right? And this is the thing. It's why different problems and stressors in work and in our lives are so subjective, because it really does depend on where we are, what our self-confidence is, what our capabilities are. So in work, just to get very, very practical, this is why I'm a huge advocate of whole life planning and workload management.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is, if you're a line manager, so if there's a line manager on the call, I know there's 1 or 2 of them, right? So get out and plan the month with your team, right? So very, very simply, what work needs to be done? How much time? So let's go black and white first. How much time is going to take to do it? Has it been started already? How much work is remaining? What's the risk if you're not going to do it? Understand the demands on the team. And then I want you to capacity plan holistically. So you ask your team, does anyone have a birthday coming up? Does anyone have a wedding coming up? Does anybody have a relative they're caring for? Does anybody have kids starting school?
Correct.
Is there anything going on in the personal lives of us as a group that we need to know about? Because once we start realizing that we are one body 24/7 and we don't split, then we can start saying, well, Nicola, I know that you've got a wedding coming up. I can't wait. I'm sure you're so excited for your sister. I know you're going to be distracted with that. So you won't be offended if I get help, from John to help you with that task.
Absolutely.
And you're like, thank God, that's the stress off me. And then I come in, I'm like, guys, sorry, I've got a chest infection. And you're like, do you know what? I'm actually nice and calm now because I got help and the wedding sorted. So Neve, I can take your stuff. And now, because we're talking about ourselves as full humans and looking at our whole lives, we're able in work to plan, execute and deliver more efficiently. We can manage everyone's expectations. And the key thing is here, we're doing it as a team, right? So we're helping each other out. We're cross-training, we're cross-supporting, and we leave our egos at the door.
This is exactly what I talk about. And I love this size 6 and it's a size 7 problem, or, you're a size 4 and it's a size 7 problem. I talk a lot about how this concept of work-life balance is so reductionist in nature. Let's start thinking, like you say, about our whole person, how work enriches life and how life enriches work, and how the two are inextricably linked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's just ridiculous to consider yourself as, you know, a work-life person. And with hybrid working and working at home, even more so.
Well, I tell you this, right? Does anyone ever talk about their cooking life balance? How about their shower life balance?
No,
Cinema life balance?
no,
Do you know what I mean? Mom life balance?
no.
No, we
All
don't.
work-life balance. And
And
it comes from this almost archaic view of this
yeah,
old school working, come in the door, you know, I don't want to say the masculine, I don't want to gender it, but, you
well, it
know,
did
come in
come
the
from
door.
there. It
Yeah,
did come from
and
there. So
leave
like,
at home, and then you come home to you know, now in most houses both people are
yeah,
working, and it's just, you can't, you have to look at it in the round, and there's still this reluctance because it's almost this perception of, well, you know, if I start bringing people's lives into this, then, you know, they won't want to work at all. It's like, well, no, everybody wants to work, everyone wants to give it their all, but you've got to,
yeah.
it's an ebb and flow, isn't it?
But on that, I just think like, so the term work-life balance, look, I think we can be a bit mean to it. It came in an era, I think, when, you know, women were working part-time and just started to work part-time, both as a mother and then in the workforce, part-time working. And then, you know, the husband traditionally then was also working, and they were trying to get balance in the home. And that's kind of where the term came from, right? So at the time, it was probably a good term to use because they were trying to balance work in the home life. Unfortunately, we like to get a word and stick to it, right? But I think to your point, I absolutely agree. But maybe even acknowledging within your team what kind of people you have on your team. So we've got some people that are known as integrators. So I'm an integrator. So work is life, life is work, and I weave it through my day most of the day. And I'm very happy that way, as long as I've got periods of complete disconnect at some points. And then there's some people in their segregators, which means that they actually thrive and need to have that structure in terms of, I put work in my box and I label that box called work, and I take it out and I do it and I put it back. And there's no right or wrong way to be. But I think the mistake that we make is we don't ask ourselves, are we an integrator or a segregator? And we don't ask our team. So if you don't know who's on your team, how can you guys work together? So like, if I know you're a segregator, I'm not going to email you in the evening, because I know that that is not what a good relationship would be for me and you. But if I know we're both integrators, or I might pop you an old WhatsApp voice note at 6:30 while I'm making the dinner, going, oh my God, I got this great idea for a lunch, you know, making the dinner, stirring the pasta. And I know you're the same as me, and I know it's not going to affect your well-being.
Very good point, because
you
we
know,
are, I think that's it, you know, exactly that. So, and people have started to put that at the bottom of their emails, haven't they? Like, I know I work flexibly. It doesn't mean you have to answer
oh
the
no, that one
screen.
bothers me. So don't get
Oh,
me
go
started
on.
on that.
Tell
That
me.
bothers me, because that is an undertone of, I'm working and it's okay if you're not working, but I'm working. So I'm like, I'm sorry, if you
I
want
never
to
thought
play
of it
that
like
game,
that.
just schedule send, and it
Schedule
was
send
within
instead.
work
Okay.
hours, and leave that footer off. Just schedule send, and don't, because some people will take it as that way. You just don't know how your message is going to be received. So just leave the message off and use schedule send.
Very good point. I'm glad you said that. I won't put that in my byline now. But I am an integrator, and you're right. And I'm sure I work with segregators. I've never had that conversation. What a great way to visualize it. It's like, this is how I'm going to work. It might not be right for you. You know, other people have to get over the sort of FOMO. It's like, nothing's going to get happen when you're not there. It's just, this is how I converse and I move forward in my concept of work. We've covered so many fantastic things, Neve. I'm there's so much going on to think about here. One of the things we sort of talked about was what we were going to learn, you know, from today. Like, what did you used to think, and how are you going to think now? And one of the things that I want to talk about briefly, because I was thinking about this, like, how am I learning as I'm going along here? And again, back to that book, Oliver Burkeman, 4,000 weeks. The concept of us having control over time is actually driving us slightly mad. So it's that relaxing, and it's almost an approach, not a Buddhist approach, but it's almost this concept of sort of, I have control over nothing, and it's so difficult to get to that point. So I can't be tied to sort of outcomes in relationships, in work, in time. I have to give what I can in the moment with kind of curiosity, and then almost see where the chips lie. But it's so difficult for so many of us to do that, because I'm trying to learn to give up control of time, to realize I'm not in control of time. What an arbitrary thought, you know, because the thing is, I think my problem is I try and micromanage. I have all the the time management tools, planning. I'm going to do this from this time to 20 past this hour. I'm going to give myself a 5-minute break. Then I'm going to do this. And every single day in those moments, things come in and I'll feel irritated at them, but there'll be great things. There'll be interesting things. There'll be things I should jump in and work on. So I suppose practically, I'm trying to learn how to give up control and be okay with that and still work alongside it. I don't know, Neve, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so you've struck on what I call just enough planning.
Ooh,
That's the term I use
writing
for
that
it.
one
So
down.
it's called just enough planning. And it's this balance of that concept in 4,000 weeks about we don't have control over time, but we do have a responsibility to ourselves and to others in terms of managing expectations, and time is the measurement. So what I mean by that is, if we're working together, I can't say to you, oh, time, what is time? Like, that's not fair, right? So I have to say to you, I'm going to meet you at 3:00, right? Because that's, in order for you to be able to have a good day, you need to know that you're meeting me at 3. So like, when we're working with other people, we do have to plan that time in together out of respect for the other person, so that they can arrange their day and they can manage their energy. And kind of like what we said earlier, for those things that matter most, so in work, the key things, the priorities, you do have to make sure that you decide on a day that you're going to work on those things, right? Because otherwise they won't get done, and we're kind of giving up control. But then for everything else, I tend not to put a time on it. So in my day, you will see my start time is planned, my end time is planned, my lunch is planned. My key meetings are planned, because that's with other people. And I have what I call hours of power. I have a few hours of power for the work that matters most. And then everything else falls in line with my energy. So it's that balance with knowing, you have to know first what's important. You always have to be considerate of the other people that you're working with, and knowing that your work impacts them, their work impacts you. But then, like, Jesus, there's no need for you to schedule 15-minute blocks for yourself. Like, no one's looking at that, only you. Like, why are you creating that stress for you? Don't do that.
Creating, because I think it's going to make things work, but it never does.
It doesn't. All it does is makes you panic, because you're like, oh my God, I only have 14 minutes, and now I only have 30 minutes. And now I checked the phone, so now I only have 12 minutes. And now we're wondering why we feel overwhelmed, because we're putting ourselves into these tiny, tiny boxes, and we're trying to so sorry, it's like how I feel when I put myself into the tiny boxes.
No, that's it. You're describing very much often my day. I've limited you. I've done it beautifully in the morning, and then it's 11 a.m. I'm like, hang on, I'm on 9:15 still. What's happened?
Yeah, and we lie to ourselves about time all the time. Look, we underestimate the time it takes us to do things we enjoy. We overestimate the time that it takes us to do things we don't like. Then we've got external factors like, the people we live with, our environment around us. If we're women, we have got our monthly cycles and all that kind of stuff. If for men, we also have monthly cycles. They just look a little bit different, and like, we all have got these things that are going on. So how do you expect to be able to, like a machine, follow a 15-minute incremental plan? But it's the balance. I'd say it again. Look, most people on this call, they work in organizations, they work with other people. So you can't be a lone ranger. You can't just kind of go off and say, I'm going to work with my energy, because that's not respecting the other people that you work with. And that's where the schedule comes in, right? And in terms of meeting the deliverables and the key things, that's where the schedule comes in. But for everything else, see how you just have your list and work as best you can. And if it spills over, just check in at the end of the day and say, how do I need to adapt tomorrow?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not always possible, but I think Oliver Burkeman talks a lot about how would you feel about your days if you weren't so fixed on outcomes. Of course, we've got to be in the workplace to an extent, but we over fixate on outcomes as opposed to just putting our energy into the tasks. So the overwhelm comes from the outcome belief often. So although we can't forget about them, we have to try and be in the moment a little bit more to stop that feeling of overwhelm, I think.
It's interesting you say that, because I had a conversation with somebody this morning just about that, and it's a really good example. So I'll share if you don't mind. So as well as working with corporates, I often work with people who are self-employed. And at this time of the year, I'm always saying to them, have you set your revenue goals? And they're like, no, Niamh, it's too overwhelming. It's too overwhelming to have a number to try and go for. And I explained to them that once you know your revenue goals, you know what you have to sell. And once you know you have to sell, you know what work you have to do, which is the work you like, but also the ugly work. And when you know what the steps are, you can then put them, into your week and say, I have to do those things this week. So maybe I have to send 10 emails or make 5 phone calls or write 1 report, the stuff, right? And the goal allows you to backtrack to the key work. And quite often when we're unable to disconnect from work after we log off and we're ruminating about work in the evenings and stuff, it's because we're not sure if we've done enough.
Yeah, it's the uncertainty. You're right.
It's
We
the
don't know if we've got where we need to be today. You're
exactly.
right. Yeah.
So if we have worked back from our goals and if we have our key tasks, and that's why I say schedule some stuff in, and if we do them, we can then say, I've done the ugly work, or I've done the valuable work, depending on which one you kind of need to phrase it as. I've done enough today. So you need those outcomes, but you don't need to over rely on them. You have to see their purpose. Their purpose is to inform your actions on a daily basis, and then for you to check to see how you're making progress and if you're still going in the right direction. So it's
the outcomes.
all of this stuff with the balance. It's all this stuff with the balance. Like, we could talk about this. This is why I talk about it for days on days with people, right? Because once we get into the practicality and how you implement it in your workday, you can see there's the nuances there in terms of, yeah, you've goals, yeah, you've got tasks, and how do you find that balance in terms of scheduling your day and letting it flow. But what I would say is, going back to the very, very first point I made, if you woke up in the morning and said, I don't do overwhelm, so what am I going to do about my day?
Yeah. And how am I going to do it differently? Yeah.
What are you going to do? So, like, if you're not allowed to do overwhelm, what are you going to do instead?
So I can see we're running out of time. I'm going to very quickly recap on some of the key points that I have learned, I've shared, but I've also learned back from today. And then we'll see if there's any questions, or Jen, if you've been thinking of any questions as we've gone along. I mean, we could probably talk on this subject all day, couldn't we, Niamh? But so the first thing Niamh said was, I am not overwhelmed. I am not, Nicola is not an overwhelmed person. Who is Nicola if she's not overwhelmed? What does she do in this moment? I love that idea. The second thing we talked about was, don't stay in overwhelm. So overwhelm comes at you like a wave, all of us. You can't you can't remove the overwhelm, but you have to break the circuits. You have to set, there was the shower, you have to set the things into the day to break the circuit of overwhelm. And we know with hybrid working, that's very difficult to do. So you have to have those conversations. Those are right conversations to have if you're not a manager, that you need to have. Let things build up and so this is about distractions. Like, let things build up around you. If you want to get something done, you have to let things build up around you and remove the distractions to get the task done properly, and be bored in the ugly work. Sit with it. Be in the corridor and choose where you're going. Take some responsibility. Don't let the doors pull you in, even though we want that in a bit, because that excuses us. Let's stand in the corridor and choose the doors and make an active choice if we can. The next one I loved, not this year, or own the season. If it's spring, don't dress for autumn and be thinking about pumpkin spice. Think about spring things instead. Live from where you're at. Then I talked about personal resource allocation. It's, don't reductionist work life. Instead, let's try and think about who, bringing it together. But are you an integrator or a segregator? Also, personal resources, we talked about being as like a size, if you're a size 6 person and you've got a size 6 problem, that's okay. If you're size 2 and there's a size 7, it's not going to work. So let's talk to everybody about where they are in their life right now and what capacity you've got. If you feel like you've got the resources to cope, you won't feel stress. Just enough planning. I need to stop putting my days into 15-minute segments and wondering at 11 minutes why I haven't put my pen to paper yet. And then the last point was, yes, outcomes, and let's not be too outcomes fixed, but then the balance of that is outcomes help you to know what's enough. So you're not like, have I done enough today? Absolutely incredible. Jen, I know you've probably got loads to say, or if anyone else has any chat questions to put in, thoughts?
But do you know what? I just thought Nicola's done this amazing like wrap up of what we've discussed in the last like 55 minutes. But my key takeaway was slightly different, and that was around the concept of strategic underachievement. Because I had this conversation with my kids recently around their out of school activities. So my kids do out of school activities every night of the week. Between them, I have to go and collect somebody from somewhere every single evening. And for me, I find that incredibly difficult. 9:30, 10 o'clock at night going out when I actually want to just be shutting down. So I had that conversation with them recently that said one night a week, you have to give me the grace to be able to say, actually, I need to know that Wednesday night is the night where I don't go anywhere. So you're going to have to work out between yourselves how that happens. If you can get a lift, that's fine, you can go. If you can share, or there might be some nights that you can't go, and that's not because I can't physically take you, but because I recognize that actually I need that little bit of downtime. So my takeaway from today is that's okay. It is okay to do that and to say that, because I know that I will keep myself restored and be able to keep giving out to my children and to my work if I have protected that little bit of time for myself. And it's nice, I think, to be able to say to ourselves, that's all right. It's okay to do that. You know, you're looking after yourself as well as this work, this life that you exist in. So,
and it's hard
I
to
have a
apply
question.
intentional neglect to children,
Yeah.
but sometimes you have to.
But it's about balance, isn't it, for everybody? And my children will recognize that actually that's what mum needs too, and that's okay. They're teenagers, you know. I have the privilege of not having little ones anymore, so you can talk to them about it. So I have a question then, either to Neve or to Nicola. It is 31 days till Christmas, if that has not put panic in any of you. Yeah, I'm starting my Christmas shopping this afternoon. So what or how are we going to manage? What's the one thing you're going to do to manage what will become this crazy season over the next 31 days?
My take as the years go by is a little bit of reduction of expectations. I have to reduce, I am not, as a working mother responsible for 3 children and so many other things in my life, elderly parents, I am not able to create a incredible house of Christmas novelty and cheer. I can put some Christmas decorations up, and I think for me it's sort of like that thing I tell myself about not looking at what everybody else is doing all the time, thinking what can I do, and reducing expectations a little bit for myself, and present giving and everything. Is I think less is more for me. Is what I was as how I'm trying to look at Christmas this year. Enjoy it. I know it's so easy to say it, but I'm trying to enjoy the small things and not get too caught up in thinking I've got to be all things to all people. Neve, what about you in Christmas? You've still got little ones.
One thing I am doing is I'm having a sneaky little bit of me time that no one's going to know about, and it's going to be like a work meeting for 2 hours, and I'm just kind of going to have a coffee while I drink hot chocolate on my own. So that's kind of my little kind of like sneaky little bit of me time, which I think is very, very important when we've got lots of things going on.
I mean, regularly. I'm thinking that almost should be every day. But
yeah, I call it. Yeah, but like especially Christmas. But like I kind of going back to like the not this year and the intentional neglect and all that stuff. Look, to sum it up, I'm having a 90s Christmas. I'm having a 90s Christmas and doing like the 90s. So like you said, Nicola, like the house, I'll have a tree. Will I have like a full display? Absolutely not. Will it be on Instagram? Absolutely not. Am I buying 7 sets of outfits? Absolutely not. So I'm doing it old school, like my mom did it, and really lowering those expectations. And straight away I'm like, oh, that's so much easier. So much easier.
Yeah. I think that's our answers, is to do less. Maybe Christmas is a real pressure.
Yeah, do like the 90s. Don't do it like 2023.
No.
I'm very conscious that we're running out of time. It's been really interesting to hear you both chat this morning and just share your thoughts and insights. I have no doubt we will do some more sessions like this in the new year, and not this year, but next year. Thank you very, very much. If anybody's got any extra questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I will ping you all a link to the recording if anybody wants to go back and listen or share. We'll get that out to you guys. But other than that, thank you very much. Go have a lunch break.
Great.
I'm out.
Thank you. Thank you
guys.
for listening.
All
Thank
right.
you, Neve.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jen.
Bye for now.